Hello and welcome back to Pharmacist Diaries, the podcast that reveals the secret lives of pharmacists, from where their journeys began, where they are now, and everything in between. I am your host, Anisha Patel, and today we are fortunate to hear from another super duper amazing paediatric pharmacist, Lamia Samrin, who currently works at the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children. Lamia and I met a couple of years back when we were both teaching the Evelina London Childrens Hospital International Masterclass. She is a cancer specialist. She works in the Oncology team at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and she leads their team, which is super exciting, and she has a wealth of experience in this area. We met as we were teaching on the same topic, so she taught a lot about oncology, and that mixed really well with the palliative care experience that I have. So we had a joint teaching session, and when I released the Great Ormond Street Hospital series, Lamia reached out to me to say, hey, let me, tell you all about my experience and my story and my journey into pharmacy. And here we are. She is an incredible pharmacist. We talk about her passion for pediatrics and how she fell in love with pharmacy from the aspect of children from a very early stage in her career. Even during university, she knew that she really enjoyed it. And we follow her journey into hospital pharmacy, learn everything that she's been doing, from education to research to managing and developing a team, and now her current part-time role that also links with her Great Ormond Street role with NHS England. Before we get into this week's episode, I really want to remind you about the discount code that I have for thenakedpharmacy.com. As my listeners or viewers of the podcast, you'll receive a 20% discount using the code PD20. Both myself, my husband, and my children are using the products, and we're absolutely loving them. I really want to advocate for this brand because, number one, it's owned and created by a pharmacist, Kevin Levers. He has over 35 years of experience working in the industry of natural medicines and has created his own company and provided us with so many different products to support our needs. For me personally, I absolutely love their gut health products, the magnesium for my sleep, and Saffrosun Energy. Because as a mum of two very young children, working full time and juggling the day-to-day life that I have, I really need that extra support to keep me energized and going throughout the day. I also wanted to let you know that if you're not sure where to start with your supplement regime, Kevin has a team of multiple pharmacists that you can either contact by phone, email, or on social media to get some support on where to get started. Check out their website, thenakedpharmacy.com. Now let's get back to the episode. So first of all, Lamia, welcome to the Pharmacist Diaries podcast. Thanks for making the time for me today. And I can't wait to hear your story. Obviously, I know a little bit about your role from the masterclass that we have taught together in the past. But let's start your journey with why you became a pharmacist in the first place.
So pharmacy, I'm not really sure if I'm honest. I think it was a case of I wanted to do something sciencey. I enjoyed maths, I enjoyed chemistry, and it was a vocational job that gave a lot of opportunity for going straight into a role and practicing and seeing patients. As I started the journey in the pharmacy career, I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually quite difficult. Didn't find all of it easy. I never did biology A level, so I went into the degree going, oh gosh, I'm quite behind. Had to take some remedial classes, remember them fondly. But as time went on, I enjoyed the degree and then came out and did my pre-reg, and I guess things just went from there.
Amazing. And during the university degree, what were your thought processes on what your career would look like and where you wanted to kind of start your journey as a pharmacist?
So definitely, and this is no disrespect to anybody who works in community pharmacy, I certainly wanted to have a bustling role in a hospital pharmacy. I really enjoy sort of meeting and working with a multidisciplinary team and being able to go on ward rounds and sort of showcase your knowledge, experience, and what you bring to the team when you're seeing patients. And actually, for me, it was always pediatrics. I always knew that that's the area I loved. When I was an undergrad student, I went to Michigan for an exchange placement, and I spent quite a lot of my time shadowing some of the pediatric teams over there. and I absolutely loved it. And I just knew from then that I wanted something to do with pediatrics, but at that point was nowhere near sure if it was going to be cancer or gastro or general pediatrics, but certainly knew it was hospital pharmacy and something with pediatrics involved.
That's incredible that you knew from so early on. I love that, because I definitely had no awareness of what I wanted to, like what specialty I wanted to go into from a very early stage. So it's exciting to hear that you had a lot of awareness of that early on in your journey. So where did you start your career once you had qualified as a pharmacist?
So my first port of call was Imperial, which then was called St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. And I lived very close to a not very nice area at that time. You can imagine Royal Oak and Westbourne Park and so on. But the hospital also, I was filled with sort of like, oh my goodness, this is such an old hospital. I got there thinking, London hospitals must be state of the art and fabulous looking inside. But it was one of the very old trusts that hadn't really had time to have its renovations. But learned a lot, big team. Quite scary, if I'm honest, to be a baby pharmacist after getting to sort of final year at university and thinking, oh, I know so much. And then you go and you're, small fish again. But no, I enjoyed it, and clearly enjoyed it enough to 2 years later come back to Imperial and join their pediatric team. So they clearly made an impression. And that's what I was looking for, a big team, but also a niche area to practice in.
Amazing. So what was your first role in pediatrics then? Did you go down a specialist route, or did they have a program where you got to see, like a rotational program where you got to see different specialties?
Yeah, actually, straight after my pre-reg, I went to Chelsea and Westminster to do almost like a step program, but it was a residency program, which was fantastic because you got to do the learning, teaching, training, and then rotate. And one of the benefits of that post was that you had something called the DAPS, the 18-month sort of program where you did 6 months in each area. And pediatrics was one of the ones I wanted to do, obviously. And I think that's where it started. And I didn't even do 3 DAPs in the end, I don't think. I think I did 2 and then went into a secondment in pediatrics. And that was sort of gastro, PICU, NICU, and I think A&E as well. And it was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. And it's, again, it was a tertiary service, so there's a lot to learn, really involved roles. And I think that's where I got the love of it, really, that they really always valued the pharmacy team and the pharmacist. And I thought, would I get this in adult? I'm sure you do. But for me, I just could see that there was so much unknown that the pharmacist could be involved in. And they always asked for advice. And I liked that. I liked to be part of the team and feel like, we're being valued as the role we do, kind of thing. So yeah, that was an incredible time, actually, and really enjoyed being a resident. I highly recommend it to anyone because you become a jack of all trade and you learn so much, and the learning curve is so incredibly steep. But it's good. It tests you. You don't get complacent. Lots to do.
Yeah, I'm with you on the whole residency kind of start to your kind of pharmacy career, especially because it builds such a solid foundation in your clinical knowledge and in your skill set as well. I did mine in Oxford. Most people who listen to the podcast know how much I loved my residency and that I would go back today if I had the opportunity, because I genuinely, really thrived in that environment. I think going from my pre-reg year into my residency, I was quite nervous. I think I didn't have as much confidence at that time when it came to believing in myself. Because even with the pre-reg year, I went to Papworth Hospital in Cambridgeshire, which is a tertiary hospital, quite a small hospital, obviously cardiology and respiratory. But I found it really hard to get hospital pre-reg. And I think at that time it was just an issue with my confidence, not necessarily my knowledge, and just showcasing who I am. I just got so uptight in the interviews, and the competition really got me down because when we obviously went for our
Yeah.
pre-reg years, the competition was really fierce. Like, you knew that you would be competing against 100 plus other pre-reggers who were fighting for that residency post or that pre-reg place. So, you know, I really struggled from kind of the end of university to getting into that pre-reg, but I really thrived in that smaller family-oriented environment where the pharmacists truly kind of like trained you up to be the best version of yourself, and that was incredible. And then when I applied for that residency, I was really nervous about it, but I learned so much during my pre-reg year that my clinical knowledge just skyrocketed.
Right.
So remember, you had to have paper drug charts and like you'd have to look through them in the interview process and then you get quizzed. Like, I smashed it in the interview because I felt really confident. I knew my answers, I knew the monitoring, I knew the interactions. You know, you identify those missing signatures or like, you know, when they do gentamicin and you're looking at levels, etc., like you can answer the questions very systematically. I think also I learned so much during my pre-reg year about a systematic process to screening a paper drug chart at the time. And when I went into the residency, as soon as I was in it, I was like, this is the place for me. It's taken me a little bit of time with my confidence, but I'm meant to be here. And then it was just all go, go, go. I loved the kind of like 3 monthly rotations and being in new environments, like adapting to one ward to another. In Oxford, it's across 4 hospitals. So you get to meet all sorts of different people. And the community there was something that I will never forget, because you build so many friends with all the F1s, the SHOs, and in Oxford they have like a really big kind of social scene weekends, and all the doctors used to have these mess parties that we used to get invited to that were really fun, and I lived with other resis. So you know, I was living the dream, honestly, like, and I worked so hard. But I lived in the pharmacy, you know, like even when I wasn't meant to be working, I'd come in to the MI office and do my diploma work and spend time with the other resis. If they needed help, we would chip in even though we weren't working. We had one other pediatric pharmacist who's a legend. He would, like, you know, bring us late night chocolates, and I don't know, I genuinely enjoyed my experience. And I met my husband during that time, so I was flying back and forth from Dubai. My love story started during my the first few months of being a resident. So every kind of like 8 weeks I'd be flying out to Dubai after night shifts and spending long weekends with him. So it was a really important part of like my journey as a professional, as a human, and kind of going into adult life. And finding a partner, like getting engaged, and then eventually getting married just after residency. So it was an incredible journey that is nice to share with other people who are residents. They know exactly what you've kind of been through.
And they're still some of my best friends, you know, because we just went through so much together, and we support each other when it was tough, and then we went out and had lots of fun when we could, you know. And at Chelsea, the best thing was they used to do these shift A's and shift B's. So the thing that got me when I started, I was like, how much leave do I get? And I was like, oh gosh, it's not very much. But then if you were on a shift A, you worked Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but then you got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off. And if you did a shift B, you actually got Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday off, but then you were working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday only. So you got tons of leave. So, you know, I'd use that to go abroad, you know, chill out and go see friends. It just gave you so much flexibility. And I just thought, this is fabulous. And they had these 1 to 9 shifts. So you do, you know, come in at 1 and finish at 9. So in the morning, you could be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go to the gym, go shopping. I lived on the King's, you know, the Fulham Road, shops everywhere. It was the life. And, you know, we had really cheap accommodation for the first couple of years. And, you know, you couldn't ask for more, really, when you come out of university and you're up to your eyeballs with debts and so on, to go into a stable job and actually be able to afford to do things in London. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always banging on about how good it is to be a resident. And students and young people always who listen to this, hopefully they consider that as a opportunity when they first graduate from university, which is good.
Work hard, play hard.
What was, I guess, it is total work hard, play hard situation. Were there any challenging elements of the residency that you found hard?
The shifts were hard, like the nighttime shifts. I would really struggle for about the week afterwards just to get back into a sleeping pattern, and then going into normal days and so on. That I found really tough. And then that does affect your social life. If you're the person on call for 3 days, you've missed out on whatever else is going on those 3 days. And that, I'd say that's probably the biggest struggle. But if you're on call, say 1 in 8, that's not so bad, if that makes sense. But yeah, you got to get on board with that and understand that for a little while there's going to be a bit of a sacrifice, but the gains for the long term, for your career, for the friends you make, is actually worth it. I don't look back and think about those bits really. I just think about the good things that came out of it, which is where you want to be, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've even got we've got a Resi WhatsApp group, but it's just now we're all mums.
Yeah,
and we've all got boys. So we have this little chat, and actually we all had, I've had my second child obviously, but they've all had their first child last year in 2022.
Right.
So and within 2 months apart by chance.
Wow.
So it's really nice to see their journeys in terms of them recently getting married and kind of going into motherhood, and what a difference. Because, when you do a residency, you're the type of person who's kind of like a go-getter. You really are, in that kind of work hard, play hard zone. You take your professional life pretty seriously.
Yep.
You definitely want to excel within your career, and you're quite competitive in nature for sure. We all have very similar characteristics, especially in my cohort in Oxford. We all were, really feisty. And it's a great characteristic to have as a resident. And these women have been super successful in their careers, and now it's really lovely to see how their life has obviously changed and molded as they've gone into motherhood, and they've taken this 1 year of maternity, but they're loving it, they're enjoying it, they're thriving in a different aspect of their life. So it's nice to have that group and that chat, the 2 a.m. messages
Who's up?
when we're all awake with crying babies. Yeah. So I guess after your residency, what kind of plans did you make for yourself, or what were you thinking in terms of your career pathway?
So this is interesting because I was in a secondment after my residency, the paediatric secondment, and I was really enjoying it, but I couldn't see staying there after the 18 months was up for various reasons, and I actually decided to go and do locuming. Handed in my notice, teed up something at another hospital, met the team, just as a locum still. And then I got an opportunity to go and actually apply for another job. And I thought, gosh, should I locum for a while? I'm young, gives me flexibility, learn other things. Or actually, do I need to think about a stable job for mortgage, etc., and so on? And I went and got the permanent job instead at Imperial. But that was what gave me the step into BMT, hematology, oncology. And you'll laugh at this because when I was a student, I chose to go abroad and pay lots of money not to be at university because I didn't want to do the oncology module because it was an optional one. And I was like, it's too hard. I freak out. I can't do oncology. And now I lead on oncology. It's such a paradoxical sort of how I've come to where I am, having thought I couldn't do it and I wouldn't like it. And that's the thing that I love. It's my passion. So it's funny, you should never write things off, and you should never really have focused ideas of what you will and will not do until you give it a go. And I learned that through getting that job at Imperial. And I started BMT thinking I love BMT, and I actually really wanted to carry on to BMT. And they've got a big centre, but there wasn't really any progression in that trust at that point. And I was a really lucky one. I trained under a very progressive lead pharmacist who gave me the opportunity to do my IP course when I was a band 7. So this was back in 2011. 11, I was still a really baby pharmacist. And she was like, fine, do your IP course. And that's what gave me the platform to be able to go into Great Ormond Street at such a early point in my career and be a fully non-medical prescribing pharmacist and lead on the outpatient daycare unit at Great Ormond Street. And that then has led to the progresses in my career, and I've stayed there, and I've been there now for 12, 13 years. So I think it's a lot about, the opportunities you get and when you take them. And it's hard sometimes, you think, gosh, someone's giving me an opportunity to do my IP course and now I'm just going to leave them. But also you've got to think about where you want to be. The services will recover, they will get other people in, and they will then take over, so on and so forth. But I think for me, that was the right place at the right time. And I really wanted it and I loved it. It was great. And I actually really enjoy working here, and hence I've been here a very, very long time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's a good point that you raise, and something that has come up on the podcast a couple of times, is that I think there's a fine balance between wanting to be very loyal to the organization that you work for. And from a professional perspective, there is an expectation to some extent that you should be loyal, and that if you keep chopping and changing into different jobs and different organizations, that when you look at your CV, it looks bad. Like, why haven't they committed to more than 1 year in a job? And that perception of from society in terms of careers is quite difficult to navigate. But at the same time, you develop a certain number of skills, or you progress in your career in a certain organization, such as you did. You enjoyed BMT, you became a prescriber, but then you potentially thought, well, what can I do with this that another organization could help me to build and progress further? And it's very difficult to let go of an organization and then move on to the next, especially when they have taken the time and energy to help you to grow. That's really hard. I mean, as a band 6, it's fine, because, everyone kind of does their diploma and their band 6 rotational job, whether it's a residency or not. And I think there is a general understanding that when you do take on a band 7 role, they may leave, and it's okay to leave. But once you get into a specialist area and you take on that band 7 or that band 8A job, obviously there is an expectation to continue and grow and develop in that one place. So I think things are molding and changing, though, now in the last few years. I think people are more understanding that it's okay that your CV changes, because you're utilizing different sectors of pharmacy. You're utilizing the different career pathways that our profession very kindly has to offer to build your skill set and actually put you in the right place for, that dream job that you want, or, to, I guess, build those stepping stones to get you to the role that you're kind of needing. I mean, how many fellowships are there now available within pharmacy where you have to request secondments? And employers are well aware that once that secondment happens and you go into that fellowship, that there is a massive possibility that you will not come back, because you gain all these leadership skills. For example, like the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer's Fellowship Program, you gain a massive amount of leadership skills. You meet an incredible amount of really executive level pharmacists or leaders within the NHS, and opportunities arise. So there is obviously time for you to, I guess, branch out into other jobs. It's hard for the NHS and the organisation itself, but in terms of keeping your staff and, that staff retention is challenging. But it's a good point to raise, because there is a lot of guilt associated with moving on from a job.
Yeah. And I've seen it now from the other side as a manager.
So when you
because when my staff now leave, because they've got the skills that they harnessed, and they want to go do new things, I'm just like, oh, but I'm losing you, and you're so good, and you've been here with us for so long, and you know the lay of the land. But you got to let them grow, and you got to let them do what's right for them.
Yeah.
So I can't keep them in a cage and say, hey, you have to work here in this directorate, in this team for the foreseeable.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It is hard as a manager because you've spent so much time and energy
Mm.
training them as well, and they've become such a, a brilliant kind of puzzle piece to your team that
Yeah,
it's then difficult to kind of let them go. And you know how much energy it takes to then train the next person. But I think actually we have to flip our mindset that actually there is beauty involved in educating that next person that comes in and
exactly.
helping them to grow and develop into the best version of themselves. It's just that we don't always have the time to do it. Or we feel like we don't have the resource. We just need someone to be like up and running ASAP.
Exactly.
So
Totally.
when you started at Great Ormond Street, did you go into a band 7 or a band 8A job at that time?
I went into an 8A as a prescriber on the daycare unit, which was very daunting, I have to say, because I went to a couple of MDTs to begin with, and I was like, I don't actually even know what these cancers are. There were names that were being thrown around like neuroblastoma, and I was like, is that a CNS disease? And then I was like reading up, and I was like, it absolutely is not. And I think it was doing that job and learning so much on my own. Actually, it was a lot of self-directed learning that got me to really understand oncology and really love it. And there is opportunity to do teaching with the medical teams and so on, and that's grown over the years, which now I get all my junior pharmacists to attend to improve their knowledge and at that level as well, that when they're interacting with the clinicians. But I think back when I started, there wasn't a huge amount in place. So yeah, I was a prescribing pharmacist, and I'd say 80% of my role was prescribing chemotherapy and supportive care medicines, and another 20% was probably looking after the patients on a day-to-day, as and when they came in, and counseling and all that stuff. So we were a small team back then. There was only about 6 of us, and since I became the principal pharmacist 6 years after, we're now double in size as a team. So you can see that the services are growing, and hence we've had to grow with it. And I think it's a fabulous area that I work in, because it is ever changing. And although that comes with its own challenges, you're never bored. You're always being told, here's a new drug, we want it, can you get it? And you spend hours reading up about it, what trials there have been. So I think it's an exciting area. And I don't think I could be anywhere else given how niche my job is right now. So it's great.
Let me take you back to that comment that you've made about growing a
Mm.
team. I assume that the services within the hospital have grown and the need for pharmacists has then grown with it.
Yeah, more or less.
Is this inpatients, outpatients, like clinics? What are we talking about here?
So outpatients has grown just because of the way we treat patients nowadays. So there used to be, if you were diagnosed with leukemia, for example, you'd just be in hospital for a couple of months. And we've changed our mindset. We've learned more about how to ambulate these patients and get them home. And that now means those patients come to the outpatient areas. So the shift has been inpatient treatment to outpatients. We're also much better at diagnosing, as you know, molecular targets, being able to do whole genome sequencing. So I think we're seeing more patients earlier in their journey. And then we've also got the increase in the lines of treatment. So when I first started, it would usually be first line, second line, palliation. And palliation would be quite small period of time and usually managed at home. Whereas now you've got first line, second line, third line, clinical trials, some more clinical trials, possibly some remission, maybe back to palliation at the palliation at the very end. So the journey for a patient that we see has increased, and that with that, there's been an increase in obviously how often they're seen, the bed numbers that we need, and then the services have had to grow to support all of that. And the treatment options we have available are huge now compared to where we were 10 years ago. So I think that's all a knock-on effect of where we are in terms of the size of our team now, and also even the clinical teams are much bigger on the ground.
Amazing. And in terms of what the pharmacists do, tell me a little bit about how it worked when you were still, I guess, paper-based, and then what the changes have been like now that Epic is obviously in existence? I know there are obviously going to be challenges with Epic and, lots of change and building the program and making sure it all works. But I think the way I'm asking the question is, think about the day in the life of that pharmacist. What was the routine like for a band 7 pharmacist who's either on a ward for inpatients or in the outpatient setting screening chemotherapy, and what it was like for them, paper-based versus electronic?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because there's lots of ways to do chemotherapy from an electronic prescribing system, and it was mandated quite some time ago now that you had to be e-based for your chemotherapy prescriptions, but we still weren't using them that way. We were still doing them on ChemoCare, it was the e-system, but we'd print them, get them hand signed, and then that prescription would follow the trail through to the pharmacists, clinicians, cytos, back to the ward, to the nurses, and so on. So there was a real element of centralizing that screening. So we used to have 2 pharmacists based in the cytos unit whose split role would be screening chemotherapy followed by manufacturing and the checking process. And I'm not sure that was the best way, but that was the way we did it in our hospital. Now, what Epic, etc., has now done is move all of that away from that centralized screening process, where it's now all done at ward level by the clinical pharmacists who are looking after those patients. And I'm not suggesting that it's the slickest way. There are challenges with Epic, as you know. There's a lot of buttons to click, and it's actually made a lot of extra work for us in terms of re-verifying things. But certainly everything is there at your fingertips. The whole patient record is sitting right in front of you. You haven't got to go rooting for any sets of notes, any communications that have fallen out, trying to chase a prescription that had 3 days of chemotherapy that you need to make chemotherapy for day 5, 6, and 7. And you're like, where is that prescription gone? I'm pretty sure I remember spending 30% of my time looking through notes, asking for notes, and just couldn't find prescriptions, which I knew had been done. And that audit trail was always by hand. And I used to have this feeling, we used to do prescribing on a Monday and a Thursday. So the admin team would bring all their notes, and there would be a trolley on the Safari Daycare unit. And then I'd have a list of all the patients that were due in the next week, and I would systematically work through all their prescribing. And I'd finish it by Wednesday afternoon, and the trolley would be empty. And I'd come in on Thursday morning, and it would be full again. So it was like Groundhog Day. Every week I'd come in and I'd just be like, oh my gosh, more prescribing to do. But that's completely gone now. Now we work on work queues. We have lots of really good systems in place to make it a lot more easy to see who's done what. So it's really changed, and I think it's definitely better. The challenge I find as a manager, and also when I do clinical work now on the wards, is you spend your life staring at this computer screen because you're constantly thinking, I'm not going to know when somebody's prescribed something. And if you think back to when we were on paper and you had paper drug charts, you'd see your patient in the morning, you'd go to ward round, you'd follow up on anything from ward round, but then you'd leave the prescription. You'd go off, you'd do your other bits and bobs, they'll call you if they need something else, and then you'd come back and maybe do a pickup in the afternoon or see the difficult or, the patients that you really needed to follow up on. Whereas now, you feel like you constantly have to have the drug charts open. And I think I'm trying to really educate the team and help them to move away from that, to be like, actually, don't worry so much in that respect, that if there's something that they need you for, they will contact you for, but you cannot be expected to sit there and look at 10 prescriptions constantly all day long. So you've got to start training them to come off the wards, move away from the Epic system that we have. But it's such a different way of thinking, especially because you don't even really take a laptop to the patient's room, and you know what I mean? You're doing it almost quite remotely.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and that's a good point to raise, because electronic prescribing has really changed the way that we work as pharmacists, and I think it's actually stopping us from excelling in other aspects of your skill set. So if you look at, the advanced pharmacy framework, there are obviously so many elements within that you need to grow, whether that's leadership, education and training, formulary and guidelines, the clinical work, the patient education, the counseling, etc. Like there's a wide variety of topics that you need to grow in. But when you are a Band 7 pharmacist and you are mainly ward-based, back in the day, the expectation was that, hey, you go to the ward from 9 to 1, and then for the rest of the day, like you said, you go back to the ward if you need anything urgent to be done, or you kind of wait for a bleep from them if they need something that's not ward stock, that needs specifically ordering, or a patient's being discharged, and you wait for them to contact you. Or if you know that someone's going to be prescribed something high risk, you'll run back to the ward, screen that, and then get on with your afternoon. So there was a lot of opportunity for you to then get involved with your senior pharmacists to work on projects, do your formulary stuff, work on guidelines, maybe do education and training for the nurses in the afternoon. And I think as kind of junior pharmacists, maybe around a decade ago, this is our generation, or my generation and yours, we were quite independent in that way, and we didn't rely on or we had an understanding that you check the patient once a day and it's okay not to see them again. But when you are electronic and you physically see all those prescriptions constantly coming through, it's like chasing a numbers game. You can see that, okay, on my ward in the morning, there's 150 prescriptions that were written overnight past 5 p.m. until I turn up. So I need to screen every single prescription before I can leave the ward, except for having lunch. However, a lot of those prescriptions are not high risk or things that can wait. But I think there's also that fear that if I only screen 100 of those out of the 150, that tomorrow there may be 200 to go through, and I need to just finish it, because otherwise I'm just going to be behind on what I need to do for the patients. And also in pediatrics, there's the element of I need to look at it, because what if they've made a mistake with prescribing, and I need to make sure that I put the patient first and physically open it up and screen it. So things have definitely changed where you feel like you're constantly chasing that electronic screen, and that culture, I think, really does, like you say, it needs to change, and managers like yourself have to explain to the sevens that it's okay not to be able to do everything, because there are lots of other jobs, there are lots of other projects, there are lots of other opportunities for you to learn and grow that are just as important as being a ward pharmacist, and having that fine balance, because it is hard. Even when I'm on the ward, of course I want to see that clinical review tab at 0, and I think mentally you also feel like you haven't done your job unless you see it at 0. But in reality, it's never going to be at 0. You could get it to 0 and 5 minutes later a new prescription pops up, or a patient comes out of surgery and 10 prescriptions come up. So it's really hard to kind of navigate those thoughts and those feelings and that guilt of not being able to cut that list down. But then you lose out on the opportunity to grow on other elements of your kind of pharmacy role. And I think also you lose your love for pharmacy because you just feel like you're a screening machine. And in community pharmacy, a lot of people say that you're constantly dispensing and checking, right? You're literally, like you said, it's Groundhog Day. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again, day in, day out. And hospital pharmacy for some areas is now becoming like this. So it's good that you've raised it, that we need to have a culture shift, and we need to kind of educate our juniors that it's okay to leave things and kind of try elsewhere.
And actually, for me, it's about the added value. You know, if you screen those 150, what value are you adding if half of those are stat doses that have already been given, or things that have been discontinued? And I think that's really hard to explain to somebody, that what you do is great, but you need to understand which bits have the most impact and choose to clinically appraise a patient that way. And when you used to have paper drug charts, it was somewhat easier, I think. Definitely think it's much harder when you're all encompassing on a system that's throws a lot of information at you, if I'm honest. So it's hard to kind of tease it out.
It's like a catch-20. It's a catch-22. When you got paper drug charts, you're blind. You leave the ward and you're blind if that, high risk insulin or the gentamicin or, warfarin's been prescribed, and then you don't look at it for 24 hours and you wish you had, when you realize the next day that there was a mistake. But then when you've got, an electronic system, you're constantly on it and seeing things popping up, and you feel the need to, be that machine. I guess I wanted to ask you as well, like, now that you've talked about the fact that you spend a lot of time on a computer and you spend a lot of time clinically screening remotely, and this is the case globally where a lot of pharmacists are feeling this way if they have electronic systems. Where do your pharmacists get involved with patient education and counselling? How does that work for your team?
So they are all ward based. That's probably the first thing I'll say, and I think that's a choice we've made to ensure that they can be right there by the patient's side whenever they need to be. So they'll touch base with every patient when they come in, whether that's our MMT team or whether that's our pharmacists, and then they'll do the same throughout their journey. When new medicines are started, there should be a conversation to let them know what's been started. And then obviously there's the whole discharge process as well. And, you got to remember, some of our patients come in and out quite quickly and will come back in every 3 weeks. So you kind of build a rapport with them. And some will just be in for long periods of time. And then there's also the patients who are newly diagnosed and they're incredibly in a difficult position trying to grasp what the diagnosis of their little children are. And we're also trying to explain the medicines to them. I think we're trying to strike the right balance to make sure that we do speak to patients. We don't just sit behind the computer. They need to know that we're there on the ward if they want to come and ask us a question. And that is getting much better. We try to give them lots of aids in terms of how to give medicines, and we speak and talk through the best ways to do that. And obviously working in pediatrics, as I'm sure you know, you have to think outside the box. It's not take 2 tablets twice a day. There's a lot of conversations around, okay, how are you going to manage this at home? What times of the day do you give medicines that suit your lifestyle? Do you have other children that you need to look after? These medicines need to go in the fridge. Are you traveling? All of that kind of stuff is an added stuff that we have to think about with our pediatric patients. And, we're very involved, and that's why the service works the way it does. We are very much on the shop floor, so to speak.
That's amazing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we always have to think outside the box with formulations, with how to give medications. I assume that there's also issues with supply and what GPs have access to that you might prescribe in-house for kind of like the supportive care. And you're helping to navigate through those issues. I mean, in palliative care, a lot of our patients are in the community with their families at home for weeks, if not months. And we have a lot of my emails are inquiries from my team to support patients with supply problems, and GPs not being able to find things on the system, or community pharmacies not being able to order something specific, or finding different routes of administration, or, a certain route hasn't worked. So what other options have we got? And because we deal with a lot of neonates, it's really challenging to find formulations without having this tiny 0.1 mil, which is, barely measurable.
Exactly.
So, we have to really think outside the box. But this is the beauty of pediatrics, and something that I've talked about with everyone on the Great Ormond Street series, and something that we all love about the job because we like problem solving. It's part of our personality here as pediatric pharmacists, that we like to find solutions for our patients and make sure that the best possible care is given. Not to say that it's not done in adults, but it's just slightly more unique. I think it's slightly more personalized because every single patient is different. You've got to take into consideration the parents' routine, the school routine, whether they're going to nursery. All of those things affect the timings of medications. You can't just say 3 times a day. It just doesn't always work for families. So it's really nice to hear that aspect of how you guys are getting involved with patient education and counselling. I assume that a lot of your time is spent working on formulary and guidelines. And like you said, so many new drugs are coming onto the market, and adding those medications to your formulary. Is that quite a time-consuming job for you?
Incredibly. Not in a bad way. It's just the funding hasn't quite caught up with what's available for peds, which I'm sure you know about. And that's just, that's a wider conversation to be had with the NHS services and so on. But as a result of that, a lot of the stuff that we use in our patients now are coming through compassionate access programs, which then need to be appraised in the trust, which we then need guidelines for. But actually, it's not that we're making them up, but it would be better if they were coming nationally than to be done locally, which, as you say, there then will be lots of variation across centres as to how they're managing these things. And we have good sort of networks with the paediatric oncology pharmacists, and we try to work together. And CCLG, which is one of our other sort of educational bodies, also helps with some of this stuff, but it's not as progressive as in adult oncology. And it's quite clear cut with adults. Treatments are available, they come through the NICE pathway, and they are approved or they're not approved. And then it's essentially a case of, yes, you could use it or not. In pediatrics, it's so much more difficult because the clinical trials go on for longer periods of time. You need to have international studies. They take time to report, to get the level of RCTs that you need to get NICE to fund things for pediatrics can take years. And that doesn't keep in time with where the treatment is. Do you know what I mean? So that causes a lot of issues on the ground for us in terms of, added paperwork, DTC submissions. But it has to be safe for the patients. I'm not suggesting that we don't do it. I'm just suggesting that at the moment that is incredibly lengthy and takes away a lot of the time from the actual clinical of seeing the patients, is all that background work that you do to get it ready for the patient in a safe way.
Amazing. And how has that kind of the formulary work and the guidelines, has that linked to the role that you're involved with in terms of NHS England?
Not quite. That is
okay.
Because that's slightly different in the sense that I was doing 1 day a week for NHS England as a link oncology paediatric pharmacist. And now what that meant was to support national pharmacists with queries around funding, commissioning, SACT work, which is sort of the mapping of the national protocols and regimens. That then sort of evolved into having an opportunity to do something a bit more at a national level for adult and pediatric cancers, but that's sort of looking at how drugs are funded through the system and working at a more commissioning level than the clinical level, if that makes sense. And so now I do that 3 days a week. And it was mainly to understand that pathway, if I'm honest, because I had some knowledge of it, but I'd never worked it, if that makes sense. Somebody would tell me this is what you do, but there's actually a lot of work that happens. And so this has given me the opportunity to actually do it myself in a wider team. Commercial medicines team is what they're called. So I understand a lot more about that now and why things are funded, not funded, what evidences you need. And, when you were a baby pharmacist, you heard about how NICE appraised things. You hear about QOFs and QALs and ICERs and you go, what on earth? You kind of understand it, but now I really do. I have to report on them. I have to really appraise whether something is going to be cost effective. So I can see where it should go for peds, if nothing else. We just don't have that structure for peds. The Medicines for Children policy, for me right now, I don't feel is fit for purpose where we are in the trajectory of all the new drugs that are coming in. But certainly I think it's going to help me understand and give that knowledge to the clinicians on the ground to say, hey, you might need to do a policy proposition here, which is a separate process, but you're more likely to then get some funding than to have local funding options. And for my area, certainly, I think that's incredibly helpful. Although it's a long process, it's the only one that's currently available. And if I can support them because I understand it, I think it's one step closer to the game.
Amazing. I love it. And how can you see your, I guess, career evolve from now? You're doing three days a week at NHS England. The remainder of your time is obviously with Great Ormond Street. I always ask kind of towards the end of the podcast that where do you see yourself in sort of 10 years' time? What's your career pathway going to look like for you?
Yeah, so the NHS England 3 days a week was a bit of a left field move. And initially it was mainly to give me some opportunity to do my advanced framework for the consultant pharmacist portfolio. I was kind of hoping that it would have or allow time to delve into the portfolio, but the job was actually a lot harder than I anticipated and there was a lot to learn. So I haven't quite managed to move on to that, but that is my end goal. I would love to be a pediatric oncology consultant pharmacist, currently there are none in the country. There was one, it's only ever been one. And she left that post. The person who came into that, I believe that they're no longer in that. So currently there aren't any. But if you think compared to the adult world or pharmacy adult world, so many consultant pharmacists, why are we so behind? And so I want to do it to be able to allow other people to do it. I think we should all be consultant pharmacists at the levels that we practice and the insane amount of detail we go on and the expertise we provide for these patients. So many drugs that I work with are sort of first in pediatrics, or they're extrapolated data that you're trying to work with. There's definitely a space for consultant pharmacists to really work with and at the clinician level, and that's what it should allow you to do if you're a consultant pharmacist. But I'm not quite there yet. I need to take the time out to do it, and the job is busy. And I guess everyone hopefully will relate to the fact that we all want to do these things, but the reality is your day-to-day job is full on. You've got family life, you've got other commitments. You want to enjoy and see your friends. But yeah, I will get there. I think I've got to cut myself a bit of slack. I think I've
You
gone
will,
through 10 years
absolutely.
of just studying and doing things, and I'm just like, it'll come.
No, absolutely. You will achieve it, 100%. Like, I'm sure you will. But you do need to be kind to yourself. You are a full-time working mum. You're currently in 2 jobs as well. So, and being in 2 very different jobs, it's 2 sets of emails, 2 sets of colleagues, 2 sets of, working practices, and completely different roles. I mean, of course, I'm in a split post. I totally understand where you're coming from, that your brain is split in 2 ways, and sometimes it's hard to even segregate day to day. So on my days that I'm working as university lecturer, I do pop on to my Evelina emails and check if any symptom management plans have come through, because I don't want my team to have to do them. And if I can spend 20 to 30 minutes and do it myself, I will try to. But if it's a complex patient that needs more time and energy, I have to allow my team to support me. But you are in 2 places at the same time, which is really hard. There is value in segregating the 2 roles completely, but on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't always work like that when you've got patients on the other side of the line. I, of course, like you, have children, a family life, and then I've got the podcast. So it is quite overwhelming in terms of getting everything done and achieving all the goals that you want to achieve. And within pharmacy, we are constantly learning and signing up for courses, and there are a lot of expectations to continually get more qualifications. It's a big joke in my family. They're like, when are you going to stop? You've done sort of 13 years of postgraduate education, post high school. When are you going to stop? I'm like, it just doesn't. There's, I've even been thinking, should I do a diploma in pediatric palliative care? I think it would really support the specialty I'm in and the learning, and I'll be able to do a better job with my patients. Like, why wouldn't I do that? But then, of course, finding the time and the energy to be able to do that is hard. And even with the consultant pathway, I looked it up recently, and it is something, again, that I'd really like to do, but I just think I'm in a place at the moment where I'm in too many places, and I need to simplify my life a little bit while my children are super young, and my son is way more needy than my daughter ever was. So I'm having to now transition through those thought processes that actually it's not as easy to be a parent of 2 versus 1. You've got this super young child who is 100% dependent on you, and he requires a lot more of my attention than Lilyanna ever did. So it's really hard. Again, like we've talked about, sleep deprivation is real. So you can't always be as functional and, that go-getter pharmacist that you want to be. And it's so hard for me because I want to do everything, but I've come to a kind of a crossroads where I have to accept and I have to be kind to myself that it's okay to slow down and do things in a different way. And when they're a little bit more stable and he's sleeping through the night, hopefully things will change for me and my brain power will, skyrocket back up to where it was before.
Exactly.
So that's amazing. Like, your journey has been really wonderful. You've done so much with your team, and it's nice to see how far you've kind of grown within the oncology, hematology space in pediatrics. And I can't wait to hear the day when you become that consultant pharmacist and we can celebrate that achievement.
It'll be a while.
No, we're going to make it happen. Yeah, it'll be a while, but when it happens, we will have to celebrate it because it's a journey. It's a journey for anyone, and it's an exciting journey. So, you got to celebrate those wins for sure. Thanks for making time to come and talk to me on the podcast today and sharing your story. Yeah, you got to dream big. Absolutely. I love that. And we'll end the podcast on a positive note to dream big.